Before we get to that, an incredible privilege. I have got on the line with me a true American hero, a man running for the U.S. House of Representatives in Maryland's 6th Congressional District. If you followed my stuff on IJ Review, you have seen a couple of articles that I've done on Dan that went off. He really doesn't need any kind of introduction, but Daniel Bongino, welcome to the show.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, I really appreciate it, man. Now, I understand that you're waiting for your daughter. She's finishing up a gymnastics class. Is that right?
Funny, running for office is a middle-class American. It's not just a campaign slogan for me. It's reality. I have to worry about things like bills and my daughter's gymnastics class. So yes, I'm sitting in a parking lot in Maryland outside of Docksider's gymnastics here, waiting for my daughter to wrap up. So that's how we roll these days.
Well, I've got to tell you, man, after being so incredibly sick for years of a political class that considers it their right to be entertained in Foggy Bottom and to be treated like royalty, like Mary Landrieu lives in a big fat house in the district and just has bare property in Louisiana, et cetera, for her address. You're actually just a normal American.
Shocker, right? Listen, we're out there. There's a limited number of us, but we're out there. One of the experiences I had in the Secret Service when I was there for 12 years or so, which was very telling, was you see quickly who the members of Congress and the Senate are, who are real people. You had some who would, they take off their congressional pin in and around the White House, I think just hoping you would ask who they were so they could yell at you and say, hey, you don't know who I am. And, it was really... it makes you almost want to vomit sometimes. But there were some guys out there, who are really good guys. You got people out there in Congress. I know the tendency is to say, they're all bad. You want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Most of them are. That's what I'm running against. But we do have a few out there, some people who really care. And, I hope to join them. For me, this is not about the champagne wishes and caviar dreams. I really don't care. I already pledged half my salary to charity just to make a point. For me, it's about going there and really shaking up this bow tie wearing, foie gras eating lunch crowd in D.C. It doesn't want to do anything but attend a cocktail party.
Right, and it's interesting, and I'm not one of those that would say vote them all out. I know out of the 535 or whatever guys up there, there are certainly a handful. But my impression is that for the most part, if most of these folks, especially a lot of the ones who, me being a bit of a political nerd, would recognize on sight, if I ran up to them at a cocktail party, I would kind of do my best to avoid them as much as possible. Yet you do want to join this group. Explain why you want to do that.
Well, it's kind of like Leon Trotsky. You may not like war, but war certainly likes you. The same thing with politics. You may not be interested in politics, but it's interested in you. There's nothing you can do to get away from it. And, I there's logic in that. And I see your point, and I get that question a lot. If you're so upset with these folks in D.C., if vitriolically, it's upset enough to resign your job, why would you want to become one of them? And the answer is I don't. I don't want to become one of them. I feel an obligation to become one of them so that one of them changes. The idea of them is something different than we associate with them now. And unlike other folks who've done this and have really become part of the problem once they got there, I understand that the first step to corruption in D.C. is believing you're the one that's not corruptible. Oh, no, it's not me, folks. I'm not going to be that way. Listen, we're all human. I'm a Christian. I don't know your religion or anybody else's, but, there's only one perfect person to walk the earth, and it wasn't me, I assure you. So what did I do? I put it in writing, and I did things to limit myself, to put a perimeter around my own human foible. Donating my salary to charity. I put it all in writing. I term limited myself to 3 terms. After 6 years in Congress, you start to, no matter how good your characters, you start getting imbued with this sense of importance. It's unnecessary. Things like no Codell trips, these free vacations they take. I pledge to never vote on a piece of legislation that doesn't affect the American people like it affects members of Congress. These are things that in advance I can say to myself, I put a fence around my own behavior to limit those natural human mistakes we all make. I don't know anybody else doing that. And so that's the only way to answer that question. But I'm not going to tell anyone in your listening audience that, oh, no, I'm above and beyond any potential mistake. That's not me, and I'd be lying to you, and I'm not going to do that.
Well, that right there bespeaks to a significant difference between the conservative vision of humanity and the leftist progressive vision of humanity. I mean, the conservative vision is, you know what, we do stuff that's self-interested. Oftentimes when we have the opportunity, especially if we anticipate we won't get caught, we'll do something we shouldn't. And the government and the laws and the implementation of policy needs to reflect that reality.
I'm so glad you said that, because that is a deeper conversation that I think is missing in America. And although I enjoy policy, I'm absolutely passionate about political ideology. And I think that's what's wrong today with America. A lot of the old JFK Democrats, like my mother, now believe that the modern Democratic Party is that party. Ask not what your country can do for you party. That party's dead. The party now is exactly what you said, a party that believes in this ideology that human beings are somehow perfectible if just guided by experts. Now, who are the experts? Always the people conveniently making the policy and taking your money. It's always funny how it works that way, isn't it? Conservatives don't believe that. Because it's not a dark view of humanity. It's a view of humanity. There's a second creation out there, and this is a test. But sooner or later, we're going to fail a test. We're not going to pass them all. How do we minimize, as conservatives, the damage of that test they're all going to fail? The liberals don't believe that. They believe sooner or later everybody's going to get 100 on the spelling test. Folks, it's never going to happen. Conservatism is a real policy based on real results in the real world. Liberalism is not. It's just based on intentions that can never, ever come to fruition. This is not utopia. It will never will be. I was glad you brought that up, though. That's a great analogy you just made.
Well, it's, the tagline, my show's called Haus Rules, and the tagline of Haus Rules is substance over symbolism. And what you're making reference to is a vision of existence, and therefore a vision of private existence and public existence and political existence and the culture, that substance is actually informed by results in history, not hopeful idealism.
Right. I think hopeful idealism is all pleasant, and that's great. We should all strive in the end towards big, broad goals like economic growth, health care security, access to health care, things like quality school and education. They're all great, but it takes policy, actual policy that's focused on not the government intervening more in your life, but policies that restrict and limit government's ability, to intervene in the individual decision-making process. Friedman said it best, that everything ultimately comes down to an allocation of scarce resources, right? You can do it one of two ways. You can allocate resources, whether it be a doctor's time, a teacher's time, food, water, whatever it may be. You can allocate it by price, or you can allocate it by rationing. Those are the only two ways to do it. There's no other way to do it. And when you do it by rationing, and the experts do it, they always give it to their crony buddies, and the poor people always starve or are killed, like they were under Stalin's regime and every other socialist regime. The point of that is, Friedman said, when you price things and you let people spend their own money, out of the four ways to spend money, the most efficient is always allowing people to spend their own money on themselves, because the cost and the quality of the product matters. Cost because it's their money, quality because they're buying it. You look at the other ways, I don't want to go into all of them, but you look at the most inefficient way to allocate resources in a price market, other people spending other people's money on other people. What matters? Cost? No, of course not. It's not your money. Does quality matter? No, because it's not your product either. You're spending it on other people. But folks, that's government. Government is that. That is the most inefficient way. That's why we have to focus on things like the Constitution that limits government's ability to intrude into the personal decision-making process and personal growth. And that is not the path we're on now at all. We're going in the exact opposite direction.
No, you're exactly right. And I got to tell you, man, being a total nerd, when you start quoting Friedman, the response that I have is almost one of arousal.
Well, it's funny because I'm more of an Austrian, actually, but Friedman's very quotable. I will say he has some good ideas, too.
Well, I've got von Mises sitting here on my desk too, so I'm right with you. But it's interesting thinking about that issue with the government and the left having a delegating decision authority to a smarter and wiser person. It always makes me think of, and I probably mention this on the show once a week, one of my very favorite things ever. Remember years and years ago when Friedman was out talking about his series Free to Choose, there was a whole bunch of excerpts where he was on Phil Donahue's TV show. I don't know if you've ever seen those.
Are you talking about the greed one?
Yes, where Donahue says, hey, well, wait a second. The problem with capitalism is there's the aspect of greed. And it's something like, don't we need to have some sort of intervention to take out greed? And Friedman says, well, wait a second. Do you think the people in the government are free of greed?
I have seen that clip probably close to 40 or 50 times. It's a wonderful clip. I encourage everybody to look up. Just go to YouTube, put in Milton Friedman, Phil Donahue, and he says exactly that. When he says capitalism, and doesn't it ever bother you, all the greed? And then Friedman responds back. Hold on one second. Hold on. Give me 1 second. Sorry, this is live TV, live radio, right? It's my daughter there. Friedman's response back, he says, do you know a society that exists without greed? And he says at one point, all government bureaus, talking about bureaucrats, they're not greedy. Of course, it's always the other guy that's greedy. You've got to watch Donahue's response because I think for the first time, although he clearly never convinced them to stop being a redistributionist, Donahue looks like, hey, maybe this guy's got a point. Like, I've got this all wrong for all this time. And, that's one thing, Schumpeter, von Mises, and Hayek, and Friedman in the Chicago school, although there's still this big conflict between the Austrian and Chicago schools, they both shared in common, that one aspect of humanity, that there will always be greed. The only question is, how do we keep greed to a minimum so that transactions are mutual, which a price-based system does? Do you want to trade your morning bagel for a series of One Direction concerts because the father's daughter doesn't want to go anymore and he's hungry in the morning? You both benefit. You didn't want the bagel. The father didn't want the One Direction ticket. That's the way a free market works. The redistributionists among us just don't want to. They just don't want to accept that.
Yeah, it makes me think. Apple introduced what is going to be my next purchase in the next month or so. Right, this week. And it made me think. The Harvard Business School just released a study the other day, and the conclusion was that businesses need to do more focusing on helping workers and raising the standard of income for the middle class. And my response to that, thinking about what Apple's doing, is I don't want Apple focused on raising the standards of income for the middle class. I don't want Apple concentrating on helping the vast majority of Americans. I want Apple focusing on making a product that I cannot live without and will freely decide to give up hundreds of my dollars to get it as soon as possible.
I mean, we really could talk for hours on this. Your questions are terrific. I do some really bad interviews sometimes, and I have to tell you, this is already one of my favorites. You just said it. The great irony of capitalism is that, two things I want to mention this, where Piketty's all wrong in his book, claiming that capitalism's failed, income inequality, all that other nonsense he put out there, with data's all wrong. You have to, produce a product people want to buy. The way capitalists make money is when people voluntarily surrender their earned resources to that capitalist who produces a product that person wants. I mean, for as powerful as Apple or Exxon or these companies may be, they can't hold a gun to your head like they do in socialist countries and force you to buy their product. And secondly, again, the other irony of capitalism, especially ironic amongst the socialist crowd, is you can't make money on your capital unless your capital is loaned out to others. That's the whole point of capitalism. What do you think these rich people do? Take the cash and swirl it under their mattress? They take the cash and they invest it. They invest it in other companies where other companies use it to make products other people want. They pay it out in dividends. They pay it out in salaries. I mean, do people really believe that a big company like IBM, like there's a Mr. IBM out there with a top hat and a monocle that's making all this money? That's not the way it works. And it's just so silly to listen to these uninformed folks. Just these politicians don't know the first thing about economics. They couldn't lecture themselves out of a wet paper bag, tell America about income inequality as they're the ones creating it. It's sadly ironic.
Oh, it totally is. You'll appreciate this story on that kind of idea. A few months ago, I was at Magic Mountain, which is a theme park out here in Southern California. And about 10 o'clock at night, I realized I lost the key to my car. And AAA couldn't help me because it was too late on a Friday night. So I found, I probably talked to 5 or 6 different locksmiths, found a guy that came out to the parking lot out in the middle of nowhere up in Magic Mountain. It was about 11 o'clock at night. It took the guy about an hour to work his way into my Audi and make a new key for it and all of that. And then he handed me a bill for $600. And I said, well, that's a lot of money. And he said, well, how many guys did you call to come out here before me? And I said, well, I called like 5. And he said, exactly. And I said, well, I got to tell you, man, it's a lot of money here, but the service that you're providing is exceptional, and I really appreciate it. And he smiled. He was an Israeli immigrant. He's been here from Israel for about 10 years. He smiled and he said, look, I'm providing you a really good service that no one else is doing. But the reality is I'm doing it because I got to feed my family.
Right. That's the whole point. I mean, you're seeing it now when it comes to things like healthcare. There was this, I was reading a Wall Street Journal op-ed about 3-4 weeks ago. I forget the name of the drug, but there's this new hepatitis drug out there. It's really expensive, but the results are staggering. And now, of course, the government, which is involved in 40 to 50% of medicine, saying, well, we don't think we're going to pay for that. It's about $80,000 for the treatment. Taking into account taking into account the fact that a lifetime of treatment would probably cost far more than that due to the liver damage and things like that. And what's your other option? Like you said, what's your other option? To sit in the Magic Mountain parking lot and sleep underneath your car? I mean, you have 2 choices. You die, or you can pay the money to incentivize companies to invent these products that are going to save your life. There's no other way. I mean, what's your third way? I don't understand. The money fairy to come down? I mean, I don't want to sound cold, and I certainly believe that, when it comes to life or death decisions, there has to be some basic level of social safety net that we take into account. The culture's not ready. But the bottom line is the culture's not ready for a society that's going to let people perish. But we can't be ridiculous about it either. Like, the product's $80,000. Oh, okay, well, the person's going to die. These people spent 10 years developing this to save your life. Just like that guy came out that night and felt that $600 was a fair price to save your butt. And that's the way capitalism works. Socialism, you know what happens? You're sleeping underneath your car, breaking your own windows the next morning and hot wiring your own car and paying $2,000-$3,000 to fix the windows and the ignition while your kids are crying, sleeping with you underneath the car that night. There you go.
That's exactly right. There'd be some guy that would roll out there at 10:30 because some bureau assigned him the task, and he may or may not be qualified at the job. Right?
Sorry, he'll probably steal your car in the process. I mean, the chances of him coming out at all are slim to none, and that's what you're seeing right now, with Obamacare. You tell people, they say, well, it's all being run through state exchanges. Nonsense. The state exchange are being told what to do. It's like saying, listen, we're going to pay for a car in government, but you have to buy a white car, and it has to be a Ford Escort, and it has to be a 1999, but we'll pay for it. You can't even find it. So, yeah, they paid for it, but there's nothing else, no products left. And that's what you're seeing with Obamacare. That's why these doctor networks are shrinking and premiums are rising. That's, again, it's a perfect example of government overreach into individual decision making and negative externalities being generated from it.
Well, there was a time in the auto business where a guy could become one of the richest people ever by saying you can have any car you want as long as it's black. But, 100 years later, you can get almost any kind of car, any kind of color, in any kind of anything, because there's a marketplace for it.
Yeah, well, that's what happened with the Lada in Russia. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Russia. They had these little white cars called Ladas. Everybody was driving them. Well, they weren't driving. They were usually pushing them down the street. That's what happened. There was no incentive. The incentive in capitalism, I'm looking at a parking lot now, the reason you have all these beautiful cars is because they all compete against each other to produce a better product so people will buy it and compete for it. That doesn't happen in these markets when people are rolling like Barney Rubble, rolling the white Lada down the street.
Yeah,
hey, Michael, I got to run. I'm sorry.
I spent a couple weeks in Russia when I was in college and found the same thing. Now, let me ask you this. We've got like a minute and a half left. I need you to tell people how to get involved in supporting Bongino for Congress.
I really appreciate that. Best thing you do, go to Bongino with a G.com and give me a follow on Twitter at the Bongino. I like the Jackie Chan of social media. I do all my own stunts, so I'd be honored to follow.
So there's no big staff there running that for you?
It's a minority of one, me. You're talking to me. So insults, criticisms, compliments, whatever you got, I take them all on Twitter.
All right, man. Well, I know you're almost running out of time. I'm running out of time. But I want to tell you, first of all, of all the various different topics that I had pulled up and all the various different things I wanted to work through with you, I got to exactly 0.
Well, we got to tell you what, we're going to do this again. I promise you. All right.
And then we might put some listeners asleep, but we can trade von Mises and Hayek and Friedman. I'll throw in a little Soul. Maybe you can bring in a little Walt Williams, and it'll be awesome.
That sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, Dan. Hey, thank you so much, and best of luck, brother. Have a good evening.
Thank you, too. Take care.
All right. What you just witnessed right there was a little bit of sycophantic sucking up from a guy that's a hero of mine. And one thing you need to do, Dan wrote a book called Life Inside the Bubble. Before getting involved or trying to get involved in politics, he was a career Secret Service agent under George Bush and Barack Obama. And it was controversial. There were people that were not happy with what he had to say, criticizing him that he was using his proximity to Bush and Obama to launch himself into a career, etc. But it's not, even Dan says it on the book. There's nothing confidential in the book. It's not a tell-all. It's just his tale of the Secret Service. So, there's no references to private conversations or attendance in high-level meetings or things like that. It's just him talking about what it's like. Go buy the book. That'll put some money into his pocket and help him for his run. Again, it's Dan Bongino, Life Inside the Bubble. And I really appreciate you listening. When we get back, we're going to talk about all kinds of fun things that's happened over the last 24 hours. Well, some fun, not so fun. This is Michael Hausam. This is Haus Rules.